It.
All right.
All right. Welcome, everyone. I'm Yashica DeBerry with Rhodes HR Consulting, and tonight we're going to talk through the 7 key HR steps every small business should have in place before you hit 10 employees. These steps will save you time, money, and stress as you grow. All right. So, of course, as I said, I'm Yashica DeBerry. I have been in HR for 20 years and I've worked in corporate across several industries. And now I work with small businesses just like yours to help keep HR simple, compliant, and stress-free. Tonight, I'll share easy, practical steps you can start using right away. So here's what we'll cover. We'll go over how you can pay people correctly, how to classify them correctly, but we'll also talk about like what a mini handbook includes. We'll go over hiring and onboarding basics. We'll talk about timekeeping and breaks and what you need to do as an employer. We'll also talk about when to, like how to document performance and how to handle, like, if you need to do a termination, what that looks like and what the best practices are. Lastly, we'll talk about like when you need to call in HR, like what that looks like and how someone like myself could help you and when you would need to bring in legal help. All right. So, as a business owner, you're probably wearing 10 hats already. Hiring help can be life-changing, but hiring the wrong way can create headaches and legal risk. And tonight, I'll show you simple steps to keep things clean and compliant so you can focus on running your business. So, just a quick question for all of you. Think about if you've ever, when you had to make your first hire, like, did you feel nervous about making that first hire? Did you feel like you just didn't know what you needed to do? Or maybe another business owner told you, like, just hire a contractor. It'll be easier, it'll be faster, just go and do that. Well, one of the biggest mistakes I see is misclassifying workers. If you control when, where, and how someone works, they're probably an employee. And when I say when and where, like if you're telling them you're going to work from 8 to 5, here's what you need to do, here's how I need you to do it, step one through step five. Um, if you're giving them a laptop or any tools to do their job, 9 times out of 10, they're probably an employee. Now, I'm simplifying this more than what it is, but that's the long and short of it. Contractors usually run their own business and set up their own schedule. Not all, but that is very common with contractors. So, calling someone the wrong thing can trigger penalties and fines from the IRS. So we want to make sure you have a really good understanding of who's an employee and who's a contractor so you don't get caught up with back taxes and fines and penalties. Something I want you to think about is think about the last person that you hired. Were they truly a contractor or more like an employee? Okay. All right. So let's talk about like when you hire someone, you do have to make a determination around will they be exempt or non-exempt? And I'll share more about what that is. There are federal and state labor laws that confirm how someone should be classified. To simplify it, I'll say this. Exempt typically means that this person is paid on a salary, and if they worked over 40 hours in a week, they would not be eligible for overtime. So whether they work 40 or 50 hours a week, their pay is still the same. And then you have non-exempt employees where they typically are paid an hourly rate, say $20 an hour. However, if they work 40 hours in a week, they would receive overtime. Now, keep in mind that it's not just about salary, but the job itself must meet strict rules. They look at the job duties, compensation. So I would say if you're in doubt about whether someone would be non-exempt or exempt, your best bet is to actually make them non-exempt and pay the overtime if you need to. If you need help with classifying your employees, you can always reach out to someone like myself or an employment lawyer, and we'll be able to kind of like do that criteria test and tell you whether the role is exempt or non-exempt. But the important piece is remembering about the overtime, whether they're eligible for it or not. Okay. All right, so let's dive into overtime basics. So you heard me mention that before on the previous slide. Um, Based on federal law, it requires that non-exempt hourly employees be paid time and a half for any hours worked over 40 in a week. Now, keep in mind that some states may be stricter like California, where the overtime rule is they have like daily overtime rules. If you're here in Florida, where I'm at, it's based on an employee is paid 1.5 times their pay after they have worked over 40 hours in a week. Okay. It's important that you make sure those hours are tracked and you pay for any overtime that an employee works. Even if they say things like, oh, don't pay me for it, don't worry about it, pay them so you can cover yourself, okay? Almost any and everything that we talk about tonight has penalties and fines connected to it, and I want to help you as a small business avoid that, those penalties and fines. So let's jump into the employee handbook. So historically, handbooks have been really thick, very boring to read, but now there is, in the past few years, courts have come back with rulings where they look at an employee handbook and they say, how short is it? How easy is it for the employee to be able to understand it? The typical employee, all the way down to the janitor. Can they read it? Can they understand it? Is it easy to follow? So whenever you have an employee handbook, you do want to have something, but you want it to be bare minimum so that you're not having to update all of that information, but you also want employees to understand it. You want it to be easy to follow. You want it to cover the essentials, and I'll go over in the next slide about what that looks like. Um, you want to basically avoid legal overload. Something I want you to think about right now, it's like if you only had room for, say, 3 to 5 or 3 to 7 policies, which ones would you want to choose? Okay. Um, So as I said, you don't need a giant handbook. I would say it should be no more than 25 pages, 30, 35 at the most, and very easy to read. Some of the policies you would want to include in there would be pay and time off basics, anti-harassment, equal opportunity policies that talk about your stance on having a harassment-free workplace and that you have equal employment opportunities. And then you want things in there about like work rules. Think in terms of attendance, safety, um, other things like how people will get paid. Very simple items that they need to know. What happens if there's inclement weather and they can't, like we've had a really bad hurricane in Florida. What happens? Do you come in? Who do you call? And then there should always be in every employee handbook an at-will statement. An at-will statement basically says that employment is at will, meaning it can be terminated by either the employee or the employer at any time, with or without cause. And that doesn't mean for anything like, for instance, at will doesn't mean that an employer can terminate all of the people who have a different religion from the owner of the company. That would be something considered a protected class. But if for some reason you decided that you didn't need that person and you didn't need the head count and it wasn't tied to anything, then that's at will. You can say thank you, but no thank you. Just like an employee can submit a resignation. That needs to be in your handbook. Okay? Um, you don't want to add anything in there that talks about like how to do a task, how to process a customer refund or something. Those are things that don't go in the handbook. It's just policies and expectations around the workplace. Okay. All right. So let's talk about before day one. So before day one, say, you've been looking and you've been recruiting and you find this person and you're like, Oh my God, that is my person. I know they'll be really good for my company. What do you want to do? You want to make an offer to see if what you're offering will be congruent with what they're looking for. Give them an offer of employment. So you want to have an offer letter that provides a clear and detailed offer around pay, what job they'll be doing, who they'll report to, where they will report if they're working on site, but also are there benefits offered? And it also would talk about like, if you accept, you need to sign by this date. There's so much more in there, but you can also have employment, standard terms of employment at the end of the offer letter. But it starts with an offer letter. And then once they sign the offer letter and get it back to you, you then want to start collecting documents before day one to make onboarding easier when they actually walk into your place of employment or start work. Those things can include the federal and state tax form if it's applicable for the state, the I-9 form, which checks employment eligibility, and I'll talk more about that. Emergency contact information, how they'll be paid. Make sure you're collecting all of those things, and it will save you like from headaches later. Okay. So let's talk about day one basics. So say they've already filled out their initial paperwork, you've gotten the offer letter back. Day one, you want to bring them in. You want to have some type of new hire orientation. And I'm going to provide you all with a template for a new hire orientation deck that you can use. You want to be able to review that essential employee handbook with them and go over the main policies. Maybe not all, but I would say the main ones that you feel are important. An attendance policy is a big one that you probably should go over with everyone. You want to go over the expectations about the job duties, go over the job descriptions, the job description, go over performance standards. But you also want to do like a welcome tour, an intro to folks that are on your team. One of the things I suggest to small business owners is don't take it all on yourself to do all of this. You are already wearing many hats. I would recommend that you find like a rock star employee that you have right now. Maybe they know the ropes really well and have them to be a mentor to your new hire. They could do like the welcome tour, introduce them, and kind of like really hold their hand for the first few weeks, which would take some of that work off of your plate and you're delegating that work. So think about that. There is a very high correlation between good onboarding and how long an employee stays with the company. So it's important to pay attention to what day one and the first few weeks look like so the employee feels welcome and it sets a positive tone for the employee to feel prepared and welcome and get acclimated into the company. So I mentioned some new hire documents, the I-9 E-Verify. Um, the I-9 is the United States' way of verifying that an employee is that a person is eligible to work in the US. The E-Verify is a system that we use to complete the I-9 electronically. If you are in another state, aside from Florida, some states require you to use E-Verify. In the state of Florida, in certain industries, you are required to use it, depending on your company size and what industry you are in. With the I-9, all employers are required to complete the I-9 along with employees completing Section 1 of the I-9 and employers completing Section 2 and the whole process being completed by the third day of employment. Um, you are required as an employer to verify the IDs. Um, so you want to request one document from list A or one document from list B and C. If you are hiring someone who is remote and you won't see them in person, you are required to do an alternate version of to verify the IDs. That alternate version would be a video call so that they can hold up the actual IDs that they have. You view them with your own eyes, and then they send you copies, and then you'll complete section two. Okay? Keep in mind that not completing I-9s in the appropriate time frame or at all puts you at risk for penalties and fines. At any point, an auditor can show up to your company and ask to see your I-9s. Of course, you would want to verify IDs, but if you have mistakes, if you have missing I-9s, there are penalties and fines for every mistake, for every miss I-9. And I want you to be aware of that so that you spend money growing your company and not paying penalties and fines. Okay? Something I want to thought that I want to leave you with. How many of you are keeping I-9s on file for every employee? Not contractors, but employees. If you're not, that's something that you may want to start doing. Okay? If you have questions, reach out. I'm happy to help. Okay, so let's talk about time tracking. And when I say time tracking, I mean what hours your hourly employees are working. You must make sure all hours worked are tracked, no exceptions. Say you have an hourly employee who's checking email at night, that needs to be tracked. And whether it's 1 minute, 10 minutes, 30 minutes, it needs to be tracked. You can use a simple app, you can use a spreadsheet, you can use a payroll system that has a time clocking system. If you need to do something manual by paper, that's totally okay too. You want to make sure you record all hours. If an employee leaves the company and or say they file a claim with the Department of Labor and say, "Hey, I wasn't paid correctly," even if you know they're not telling the truth, your records will need to confirm what the employee is saying or not saying. If you don't have the records, that's not good for the employer. So we call that burden of proof being on the employer. So make sure your employees are tracking their time as they work, that you're keeping up with it, okay? So you can avoid potential wage and hour claims. All right, let's talk about meal and rest breaks. So, federal law doesn't require breaks, but many states do. For example, some require 30-minute unpaid lunch after a certain amount of hours, whether it's 4, 5, 6 hours, but you always want to check your state's rules. I'm here in Florida. Florida isn't one of those states unless the worker is a minor and that's working for you, but it's still in good form to offer a lunch break and paid breaks. It's just good culture, and also people need a break to eat. So I would definitely say make sure you're following those rules, okay? All right, so I'm going to go back to, I talked about tracking time, but there's also something called attestations. So this simply means that whenever the pay period is over and your employee has put their hours in, they've been tracking the whole pay period, you want to make sure that there is a way for them to sign off and attest to those hours being correct. Um, if you can do that, if there is an issue in the future where an employee says, "Hey, my employer didn't pay me correctly," you can go back to what they signed off on and say, "Hey, this employee is saying they had an issue, but they signed off saying the hours was correct." You have proof showing that they attested to the hours, there were no issues, and that makes your case much stronger. So think about this. Are your employees currently signing off on hours, or do you just trust whatever they write on this timesheet? If there's a time clock and they're clocking, that makes it even better because it's in based on the punch and what's happening in real time. Okay? Keep that in mind. So let's talk about performance. So whenever you have an employee, at some point there will be a performance issue. Someone won't meet the expectations that you've set, and that can be really, really frustrating. However, it's important that Not only do you talk to them verbally, but you make sure you send a follow-up in writing somewhere or you type it up, they sign it, whatever floats your boat. Make sure it's in writing somewhere to show that the conversation did happen. We don't need them to agree, but we need to make sure there's proof that I discussed this with you. I went over what the expectations were and you were aware. So the rule in HR is if it's not written down, it didn't happen. Because what happens when someone doesn't want to take responsibility, they say things like, I don't remember us talking about that. No, I don't remember. So make sure you're following up with an email. You can say, hey, per our conversation on Monday, September the 10th, we talked about blah, blah, blah. You know, you have been late 3 times in September on these specific dates. And here's the policy that we went over. The expectation is that you will work from X from 8 to 5 and you will be on time. On time is showing up to work at this time. So make sure you're documenting everything. Be very specific and not vague. Think about how I said the dates and I listed them out as opposed to saying you are often late. What does that mean? That can be really subjective. I can think I'm on time. You could think I'm late. But if you say you're late, here's your schedule, here's what time you have been coming in, that's very specific. You want to keep dates and facts as much as you can. Keep a notebook, write that stuff down or send yourself an email so you can go back and look at and use it to create really good documentation. Okay? Um, something to give you to think about if you have let someone go before in the past, like, do you remember documenting anything first? And if you didn't, this is an opportunity for you to do it different in the future. Okay. I am also going to send you all a list of a sample documentation email so you'll know what a good documentation looks like. So now let's talk about termination. At some point, it's inevitable. You will have to terminate someone. So let's go over some good best practices for termination. When you need to terminate someone, you want to make sure you are being brief. You want to make sure you're being respectful. Um, Keep the conversation short and professional. I would say, even if the person is upset, you want to maintain your composure. Avoid emotional language like use of profanity or maybe snapping back and saying things that would cause a confrontation to be even more heightened. Um, if you're not able to do that, you may not be the right person to terminate. Or you may need to wait until you're in a space where you're calm and you can maintain your composure and terminate. Um, and you want to get straight to the point about, hey, listen, we've had some concerns and I want you to know today we're terminating your employment. Um, and when it will be effective, you want to go ahead and rip the band-aid off, but be as respectful and have dignity with it. Thank them for their time, thank them for their contributions to the company, but be clear that you're letting them go. You don't want your messaging to be something where they end up showing up the next day because they thought you were just giving them a slap on the hand. Like, no, it's a real termination. Okay. When you are terminating someone, you also want to think about final pay requirements by state. There are states that require you to give the final pay right then and there when you're terminating someone. And then there are states that are okay with you paying on the next pay schedule. You need to know what that looks like. There are also states that require you to give certain final termination documents. In the state of Georgia, there is a required separation notice that you must give to all employees. Okay. You also want to work on collecting company property as much as you can at that time. You do not want to deduct someone's paycheck because they did not give company property back. In many states, that is illegal. And if you need guidance on how to handle getting property back, we can talk through that. But I would recommend that you not deduct something from someone's check. Okay. So, by following these termination tips, you can ensure a smooth and professional separation process while protecting your business. I think it's also important to note two more things. Keep in mind that when you're terminating someone, the tone that you take makes the determination oftentimes on whether they will go to a lawyer, whether they will feel like they need like some type of revenge response against you as an employer. So dignity is key. Also, a lot of workplace violence issues that you've heard of people who come back and start shooting in the workplace has to do with like how they were treated. Not all, but oftentimes you see that. So remember that, like respectfulness and dignity goes a long ways. And just think about the age-old rule. How would you want to be treated if someone was letting you go? Okay. All right. So most of all, I'm sure you hear a theme in all of this of protecting yourself. Like you want to protect yourself, protect your company. Don't fire in the heat of the moment. Don't fire in front of a group of folks. That is one of the worst things that you can do. Step back and document what happened. And if you're unsure, call an HR consultant, call a lawyer, an employment lawyer. This small pause can save you big trouble. I had a client who fired a pregnant employee, and they ended up bringing her back because they knew if they didn't, like it was the way they did it. They knew they were going to get sued. I don't want you to make knee-jerk reactions like that. Like, let's talk it through and figure out how we can best help you protect yourself and your company as you continue to grow. Um, and most of all, like I've said it several times, make sure you document everything. It just makes your case stronger. Think about the unemployment claims. If you document really well, oftentimes that can be good for you because they may rule in your favor. Not all the time, but oftentimes they will, especially if it's congruent with your policies and you've got sign-offs and acknowledgments for your handbook policies. All right. So let's talk about, you don't have, say you don't have an HR infrastructure within your company right now. You can't afford it. That's okay. But hiring a full-time person, we know that's not realistic, but there is fractional HR. And what that means is you get to have an expert like myself to be able to come in and work in your company, and do the HR stuff for you, but without the full-time cost. It could be a few hours a month. Imagine if you had an HR partner you could text tomorrow or pick up the phone and call. What would be your first question? What's top of mind for you that's HR related? What if that person could handle all things HR while you go and focus on the things, the reasons why you started the business in the first place? Okay. And then lastly, the seventh item is, you may say, well, when do I need to call a lawyer? What does that look like? Not everything needs a lawyer, but call one if there's a discrimination or harassment claim. Proactively call one if you have a risky termination. What could that look like? Maybe an employee is saying they're coming back from leave and they're saying, hey, you're treating me differently since I've gone out on leave. Maybe they're over the age of 40 and they're claiming that they're being treated different because they don't know how to use technology or whatever it may be in your workplace. You may, if it's a risky termination and it's kind of like fraught with twists and turns, you may want to talk with a lawyer. A lawyer can kind of like play it backwards of like, let's say we terminated this person tomorrow. What are all the bad things that could happen and could affect your company? Let's say if we kept them, what are the pros and cons? So they can kind of like help figure out a game plan and work proactively with you. Um, or maybe you got an ELC claim or you got a letter from a lawyer saying that we've got some claims we'd like to investigate. Keep in mind that when employees leave the company, in some places they can have up to 3 years to bring a claim to your company. So you want to make sure that you are checking in with someone who's willing to support you and help you reduce risk. Okay? So protect your business. That is the theme across the line. Protect your business and everything that you've built. Ultimately, you want a smart partnership. You want to be able to have HR that can help you, whether it's on a project base or you're calling in and calling your HR person and saying, I want to run this by you. Tell me what you think about this. You want to be able to have a lawyer where if you were needed to put something in writing or you needed to have some type of offer letter that was very specific or some type of risky issue, you can have a lawyer to call for those higher risk items. Ultimately, we want to put you in a position to reduce risk, save time and money, and you can do that with such partnerships. Okay. So here's what I want you to remember. Basically, pay your people correctly. You want to keep your handbook short, and keep the essentials in there, but you also want to follow that handbook. Don't have a handbook and not follow it. That will get you in trouble too. Track the hours for your employees that are hourly. Make sure they're taking their breaks and lunches. For any issues that are happening or any verbal conversations that you're happening. And keep in mind, you want to document these things and not just document performance, document good things too. If people do really good things, take the time out to write. Like, I know we talked about this, but I want to put this in writing to you. You did such a great job. Keep up the good work. It's not just about the bad things, but also the good things. And don't wait too long to ask for help. If you need help, you can reach out to an HR consultant, an employment lawyer. I know for me, for my clients, they will call me and set up time on my calendar and walk me through. They'll say, "Hey, I want to terminate this person." And I'm like, "Tell me what's going on." And then I give them guidance and they're able to follow it. So, as a final reflection, like which of these HR must-dos will you act on first? Um, Following these practical steps can help your business stay compliant and avoid costly mistakes. Um, and that's all that I have for tonight. I definitely want to thank you all for your time. I've left all of my contact information here. You are welcome to reach out to me if you have a question. If you have something that's really pressing and you want to ask, text me, email me, or you can even book time with me and I'd be happy to answer any question that you may have. But I really thank you for your time and your attention tonight. And if you need anything, reach out. And thank you, Maggie, for making sure you're bringing all of this good feed information to your clients. I think that's very good. Thank you all so much.
Thank you so much, Yashika. I do have ones that I was asked prior to, if that's okay.
Sure.
Okay. So one of the first questions that I got was, I'm a small business, so how will anyone know that I have not done these things?
Well, at any time, there can be audits. Audits do happen, and a lot of people feel like I'm a small business. Why would I even care? You could take the risk, but is the risk bigger than you and you putting money towards penalties and fines, or would you rather take that money to continue to grow your company? The other part is there are tons of employees out here these days who come into your company not to just get a job, but they make a living off of seeing if you're doing things the right way. I remember meeting an employee at a company that I worked at, and he was there for about 2 weeks, and he looked into the building and noticed that there weren't any ramps for wheelchairs to be able to come into. And then he filed a claim and then he was gone. That
Wow.
happens all the time. So there are not so good people in this world. And they're not just auditors, but they're also employees who know that they can get a settlement really quickly and they use that and move on to the next employer. I don't want anyone to be that employer and get hit by employees. Or you can also get claims from the Department of Labor, EEOC, from OSHA, the USCIS, the federal area that governs I-9. So there's risks and you may get away with it, but I would want you not to have those risks to worry about because that's not what you got into business for.
Thank you so much. Second question is if I've already, sorry, I'm trying to read it. If I have already hired an employee and I didn't follow one of the steps that I needed to, what should I do now?
It depends on what it is. If for some reasons, let's say you didn't do the I-9, then we would need to go back and do the I-9, but you also need to be honest about why you didn't do it. If you're using the E-Verify system, which is the electronic system for I-9s, it will ask a reason. Why is this late? And you want to be very honest about it. Thankfully, when audits are done, they do look at employers who are operating in good faith because sometimes things get missed, or like right now, maybe this is your first time learning about this. That's okay. um, an employer will, I mean, an auditor will see that and give grace for you. Now, if you got a ton of them, they might not give you much grace, but they'll give you some if they see that this person made a mistake and they, as soon as they knew, they fixed it. If it's like an offer letter, I wouldn't go back, but I mean, because it's already established, but it depends on what it is.
Thank you. Last question. How do you deal with hiring people who have a license? So this is specifically from, just to give background, this is from a therapist. Um, so a lot of our clientele are therapists or nurse practitioners,
Mhm.
specifically in psych nurse practitioners. And they are under the impression that since uh, their colleagues are licensed, that they're automatically a 1099.
It depends on how they're working and in what capacity. We would have to kind of like look at the criteria. Per the IRS, there's a criteria list. And you know what? I'll share that, Maggie. I'll share the how you can
Classify.
know if
Yeah.
someone is a contractor or not. I have a checklist that I can share with everyone. But it just depends on what capacity they're working in. Like, for instance, when you think about that type of field, are they working for, do they have other clients? Is that the only company that they're working for? Are there other clients? Like, say, for instance, you have lawyers that work on 1099 as a contractor, but they may have more than one client. I am a fractional HR person and I have more than one client. But my clients do not tell me when to show up to meetings. I don't even attend their meetings. They do not manage my schedule saying you have to work from 8 to 5. They don't provide me with tools. It goes back to all of those things like what's the setup of that relationship? What does that look like? Is it for a defined period of time? And I'll share that checklist because that's a really tricky one in knowing how you classify them.
Awesome. Thank you so much again, Yashika. This has been amazing information. I will go ahead and send out the replay to anyone, as well as all of the wonderful gifts that Yashika has also given us. Please make sure to save her website so that way, if something comes up within your business, you can reach out to her directly. Yashika's awesome with getting you the answers that you need and the next steps to make these things that can be super complicated, just like dealing with the IRS and any other
Yeah.
capacity, simple to understand and follow.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thank you for having me. And if you all have any questions, please reach out. Right.